This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
Sometimes people forget in hospitality, doing that, extra thing or going that extra mile for our guests, I think is key. And I'm really proud that we have a large group of people that are wanting to do that and do that on the reg. I think that's what I love most about this job.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. There are many small hospitality groups across the country with a handful of venues that are often the same or similar offerings in each venue. But there's a few that have chanced their arm on multiple cuisines with great success. What does it take to run these from the top and ensure the food offering maintains the standards across multiple cuisines and offerings? Amanda Fuller is the Group Executive Chef of the Sam Prince Hospitality Group. Amanda, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much, Huck. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to get you on the show. You've got a pretty incredible sort of group there with very different offerings. What's it like for you sort of overlooking all of those different restaurant brands?
It's fun, I guess. In short, it's fun to oversee a diverse group that has such different offerings from venue to venue, yet so many consistencies at the same time.
Well, tell us just a little bit about the group and the different restaurants that you do have.
So we're a small group, as mentioned. We have 3 venues in Sydney and 2 in Melbourne, which we branched out to Melbourne 2 and a bit years ago. So we have Mexico, which is our flagship restaurant on Pitt Street that just celebrated its 10th birthday. So we're super proud, I think, in this, during the times that we've just had of recent years, to make 10 years is a pretty massive milestone. Which we're very, very proud of. Our market-to-table offering at Mexico is what sets us apart, I suppose, and our large, extensive tequila. We have 250 different types of tequila and mezcal at Mexico, so that's a pretty attractive draw card for, a fun evening and an education piece that we offer that goes behind that. We also have Kid Kyoto, who was our newest opening in Sydney, I suppose, which opened 5 years ago. It's a modern take on Japanese izakaya. Our success there, I think, was a slow burn, if I'm honest, but, consistency and innovation is what sets us apart there, I suppose. We have, an extensive sake list and a Japanese whiskey list and a very innovative menu that changes frequently with a very talented head chef at the helm. Indu is our middle child, I suppose. It's about 7 years old. We offer modern Sri Lankan, South Indian food, but, we need to, communicate that it's not just about curries. We have lots of innovative things on the menu, string hoppers. Obviously we do have curries, but hoppers and dosas and, ceviche style dishes, lots of vegetarian, vegan offers. Indu's a real sensory overload business with, beautiful texture seats and lovely lighting and a really cool playlist. That a kind of a place that takes you away once you get through the entrance. It's a very sensory, amazing venue on George Street in one of the oldest buildings in Sydney, which is really great. And then our 2 businesses in Melbourne. So we tried to emulate Mexico's success in Melbourne, which, has been bumpy, if I'm honest, due to COVID and, the numbers of people don't seem to have returned in Melbourne like they have here. And Indu. So we have picked up the best bits of Indu, the textures and the dining scene, and put it on Collins Street, which has been a challenge because Melbourne is obviously very different to Sydney, but a fun escape nonetheless.
You've got like 3 very incredibly different cuisines. How did you go about deciding sort of what cuisines to move forward with and execute them so well?
To be honest, the Sam Prince is the creative mind behind the decisions to do these cuisines. Mexican is a passion of his, which is how Mexico was born. Indu Sam Prince is Sri Lankan, so the story behind Indu kind of comes from, going back to the village and his roots of culture and, hospitality that he wanted to bring to Sydney. And Kid Kyoto, came about from a trip to Japan, I believe, that, they wanted to bring something to Sydney that was a little bit different to what's happening at present. And there's a very big focus on music at Kid Kyoto. It was supposed to be a bit of a music writes the menu kind of vibe. And all of our restaurants have a really big emphasis on, playlists. We don't just play whatever's cool on Spotify at the time. We have specific curated albums that play in our venues that you'll find in Sydney and Melbourne. So continuity across the both. It's a lot of Beatles and the White Album and stuff in Indu, and Kid Kyoto's a bit more rock grunge, and Mexico's a bit more mix mash DJ combinations of songs that you would remember from 10, 15 years ago, less so the current stuff.
You mentioned the cuisines are very different, but the structure and the systems to make them successful, there's a commonality there. I want to explore that in a little while in depth, but take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play with you growing up?
I think I probably wasn't as exposed to, food as much as, some of my peers. I grew up in the inner west in Sydney, and, my parents were, my mum's a nurse and my dad was, in printing. So we were a pretty average blue collar family that, didn't really dine out, out of our area. And, I really felt like I wanted more. I went to school with a lot of cultural kids, and, my boring lunches didn't fare up to theirs so much. And then as I got older, I guess, the gap just widened and I wanted to explore more. And school, whilst I loved the social element, it wasn't somewhere I particularly enjoyed being. So becoming a chef was something that, I really wanted to do more or less off my own bat. Nobody I knew was a chef. I hadn't dined out heaps as a kid. So it was just something that I was interested in. I did hospitality at school like most people, and my hospitality teacher certainly wasn't super inspiring, but it definitely evoked something in me that wanted to chase a little bit of the unknown. So I started my apprenticeship quite young, and I went to ride TAFE, and I, met a lot of people that were working at some really cool places and institutions. And kind of off the back of that, I finished my apprenticeship in Sydney, and I moved off to Ayers Rock as a young commie chef. Yeah, just to, I guess, get out of home and leave Sydney. And I always have this penchant for things that I'm not quite too sure about, and throw myself into it with both feet and then swim, I guess. So I worked at Ayers Rock for a few years, and there I met some really awesome, inspiring chefs that came from all walks of life, because, no one's born and from Ayers Rock. Everybody's from somewhere else. So there's lots of stories and pieces to link together through people that are joined through common interest of cooking and, hospitality.
Do you have any stories of what it was like while you were there, and the sort of first-time experiences with ingredients you hadn't seen before? Like
so many stories. I recall we used to do events where people would want like witchetty grubs. And, we had to apply to the elders we would have to buy them from the Aboriginals there. And sometimes you could get them and sometimes you couldn't for religious reasons, but getting them in and, having to tiptoe around them because they were, back then in early 2000s, they were like $50 each, super expensive, and having to treat them with care. But, we'd receive this, disgusting bowl of these filthy bugs that were still alive that we'd have to gently wash and prepare and serve. That was really cool because it wasn't as simple as pulling it out of the cool room, and it wasn't always consistent. Sometimes we could get them, sometimes we couldn't. So that was quite cool, receiving like a dirty bunch of alive, filthy worms. That was, but that was so amazing because they were so unique and something that I've never seen since. That was a really great experience. And I think, not so much a food thing, but just having, a road train that had like 3 trailers pull up to bring our produce was, an epic time because, all chefs would have to stop what they were doing and kind of create like a chain. And, you'd pass ingredients from the truck to one chef to next chef, next chef, next chef, and it would slowly fill the cool room. And you knew that that's all you had until the next road train came. So that was something that I wasn't used to at the time, that I remember thinking what a profound impact it had on me because, now we take for granted you can get 2 or 3 deliveries a day, whereas back then it was, this is what you got until the next train comes. So, make sure you don't waste anything. And I guess that's where, utilising everything kind of came into me personally because you kind of had to. There was no, oh God, we've just run out of something, let's go get it. It just wasn't possible.
Uluru was such a unique place and experience that you had. Where did you go to from there?
So I worked at Esrock for 2.5 years, and it was some of the best fun times of my life, cooking on sand dunes with no power or whatever. And it was so impactful in my life. And after that, I moved to Tasmania I guess I went from the hottest place ever to the wettest, coldest place ever. I moved to the west coast of Tasmania where the salmon and trout farms are. Wasn't really what I expected when I went there, and the story to get there is a bit unusual. But yeah, I landed in Tassie for 2 years and worked with seafood, scallops and crayfish and hake, and a heavily seafood menu in Tassie for a couple of years. And Tassie was such a different place to Esrock for obvious reasons. Totally different type of tourists, locals. It was a very small fishing village, 4 hours from Hobart. It was a very isolating experience, but of a different kind compared to Esrock. Less staff, less camaraderie. Oh my goodness, sorry. Less camaraderie. So it was a very completely polar opposite experience. That was very enjoyable.
What were some of the really key sort of venues and people that you worked under as you were sort of slowly building your career?
I think, I worked in unusual places, so the key venues were less known. I worked in the fine dining restaurant in Ayers Rock, which had won awards in the Northern Territory and really focused on using indigenous ingredients. But I think it was a little bit ahead of its time compared to, now wattle seed, et cetera, is used quite widely, but it certainly wasn't in the early 2000s. I didn't necessarily work in places that are particularly well known, but I worked with profound people. Like I did events in Tasmania with Tetsuya, and we did a lot of events in Esrock with, 4 famous people, less so famous chefs. And my time in Sydney and I guess the Northern Territory and Tasmania were less in properties that were well known, but for did a lot of things with some distinguished people. I guess the times of me working in places that were more well known were more in London, I guess, which was where I moved to after Tassie.
Yeah, take us to London. Was that a bit of a shock for you compared to what you were used to?
Yeah, massively. I think I, went over on a working holiday visa like most people were in, the early 2000s, hoping to, work to fund travel exclusively, but it kind of ended up being the complete opposite for me. I worked more than I travelled, but I fell into a really great supportive job that was working for Oliver Payton, who at the time was, a pretty big deal on TV. And yeah, kind of walked in off the street into a venue and asked if there was a position, and, the rest was kind of history. I was there for almost 10 years, started as a young female blonde head chef, and evolved into a group executive chef for 16 venues that were predominantly in really well-known institutions. It was crazy, but so awesome because it was such a phenomenal opportunity for me.
You've cooked for many people in London. Was there any sort of notable sort of standout clients or experiences that you had?
Yeah, I was very lucky. We had lots, just by nature of the location of the venues in London, a lot of, big deal people, I guess, came through the doors. But something that stands out to be was super fun and incredibly rewarding was we did a No Meat Monday launch with Paul McCartney for his late wife's legacy of No Meat Monday. And we had an event. I used to run a restaurant called In the Park, which was in St James's Park outside Buckingham Palace, just near the Mall. And this event that we had was full of everybody that was current at the time, Yoko Ono and Sophie Ellis-Baxter and Kelly Osbourne and Paul McCartney's daughter, Stella McCartney, and it was just so A-lister filled. And, I worked with Paul McCartney and his team to replicate recipes and dishes that Linda was creating for this amazing event, and it was just the best. There was so many people there that were super important especially for the vegetarian scene, and having that, meetings with Paul McCartney and his team was just wild. That was definitely a big moment in my career, I suppose, to be entrusted with working with him to execute something so important. It was awesome.
With a role like that, and also looking after 16 venues in the UK, tell us a little bit about your approach to food and your sort of cooking in those circumstances back then.
So I think my approach to food has always been to respectfully prepare it, not mess with things too much, and focus on buying the best quality ingredients that you can at the time, and doing as little to it as possible to make sure that the fundamental flavors and profile is intact. And I think that's evolved certainly with these businesses with a lot of slow cooking and not a lot of labor needs to go into making a hopper batter and starting from scratch. So I guess my approach has evolved a lot, but there, the waste-free stuff was just coming into play. So really having a nose-to-tail kind of approach, not to mess with things too much and focus on quality, sustainable, seasonal ingredients is kind of my current approach as well. I think in Australia, the seasonality thing, we all talk about it, but it's less prevalent than it is in the UK because the seasons are less defined. Case in point, the crazy heat wave that we just had last week and the week before. Our seasons aren't so definitive as they are over there.
With your experiences in Tasmania and Uluru as well, do you feel an urge to have indigenous sort of ingredients weave through your food as well?
Not so much these days, if I'm honest. I think, a lot of the flavours that we were using then are less complex now because there's more saturation for people using them and there's more availability, I guess. There's companies now where you can, buy certain spices in, native spices quite easily, whereas back then, 2000, 2001, it wasn't really commonplace, I suppose. But now, I don't necessarily, we feel the need. We do use, at Kid Creator, we use quite a few, but elsewhere we don't. And I think it's probably a combination of, saturation. It's not as innovative, I suppose, as it used to be, and costs these days, let's be honest, it's getting tougher week by week to produce a profitable value meal for people. So considering ingredients is really important and how they're best used. Sometimes you can sprinkle something with something that sounds really good, but if it's not adding anything to the dish, then it's kind of pointless inclusion.
What brought you back to Australia?
Family. I've got a couple of kids, so I had children over there and I'd been there for 10 years and I came back for family, really. And things were starting to get a bit weird in the UK with Brexit and, a lot of fundamental changes that, were changing the way people were eating out and dining. And I wanted to explore what had changed in Australia. I'd been gone from Sydney for 15 years, a couple of years in Ayers Rock and a couple of years in Tassie that extended, a bit. So 15 years is a long time to be away from home.
Tell us about your role at the Sam Prince Hospitality Group. How did that come about and what's the journey been like for you with it?
Oh, it's, it's such a great diverse role that kind of happened by chance. I had a friend of mine that worked for Zambrero, who's part of this company also, and they put me through to somebody who knew somebody, and I ended up with this role that didn't exist prior to me coming. And I, have intertwined myself in every facet of the business. It's a very inclusive, supportive, inclusive, supportive team that, has these diverse restaurants. And, we focus heavily on growing our own staff, and we take a lot of pride in retention and empowering people to run these businesses as their own. And I think that's why I enjoy working here so much, because whilst I'm group exec chef, I'm also doing a lot of other things, financials, etc., that I did in the UK that transfer well here. I have good financial overview and understanding of how a business operates, and I think that's the value that I add to this business, alongside mentoring and growing chefs and making sure that our offer is consistent and concise so that our guests have a wonderful experience, from a food perspective and also from a service perspective, mentoring young guys to help make these businesses, great places to be.
I want to talk a bit about mentoring. You have a major role with women in hospitality. Tell us a little bit about that and your role within it.
So I've been, a friend, I suppose you could call it, of women hospitality for quite a few years. Like I mentioned, I've actually got 3 children, and I'm a mum and a chef, so I've been a friend of theirs for quite a few years, and I joined them to help with the mentor program a few years ago as a mentor. I had a really great mentee who actually came into my venues, and I helped give her, commercial cooking experience, and now she's, doing these wonderful cooking classes with Maeve Omar, and she just has this amazing passion and light for food. It's so great. But just this year, I was asked to join the board of Women Hospitality, so I'm super chuffed and proud to be standing alongside these phenomenal women who want to make change and lead a pathway for females in the hospitality sector. So it's all quite new, but I'm going to be heading up the mentor program, which I'm very familiar with. We'll be taking enrollments kind of now and launching in July. So I think any hospitality women or men that want to have a mentor or want to have someone to help guide them through their career, whether it's chefs or people who are interested in bar work or whatever, I think it's a great organisation to shine a light on females. And I think it's warming to see that there's an interest, and there are a lot more females in the business now than I think there ever has been, and I think that's great to see.
We've had a lot of discussions on the podcast with people about how different kitchens and the industry are to a couple of decades ago. How much change has there been, and what are you seeing is the landscape at the moment compared to a couple of decades ago?
I think there's been infinite change. Like, so many points have changed that have, really happened for the better. I think, working hours for one, when I was a young chef, 80, 90 hours was kind of a normal week, whereas now, my team don't really exceed 40, and a lot of places are, no one's pushing over 42, which I think is outstanding, because it's recognising that, this career needs to kind of pair up with other careers, I suppose, and not, and having a life out of work. I think that's really important. I think that the pay gap is closing. I think that whilst it's very expensive as a business to absorb increased labour costs, I think it's important that chefs and the hospitality industry are recognised to be paid more. Fair day's work for fair day's pay has always been a bit of a saying that I've had, but I think it's good that that's kind of happened. I think that, the flexibility in working hours has meant that a lot of people, women, including myself, have been able to stay within the sector. Mums always fall into primary carer roles, and, I feel so lucky to be able to work for an organisation that's supportive in that. And, we have teams, people that are parents within our business, and I think it's important to recognise that, being flexible helps with retention, which helps with, customer satisfaction because our staff are happy. I think that, the pay gap, the, flexible or understanding working hours, massive fundamental changes that needed to happen and were well overdue. And I really like that it's the norm now across the sector. And in turn, a lot more females. We have a lot of female chefs in our business, and managers and senior management that are female. And I think that, it's a telling way. And I think once customers are more on board with perception of value and understanding that hospitality, is more to be appreciated, I think that will go a long way as well.
You mentioned that you opened Mexico and Indu in Melbourne during the last couple of years, during a period of time that's been the most challenging for the industry. What's that been like, trying to get them up and running interstate with with COVID and the multiple lockdowns?
To be honest, really hard. We opened. I was on the first flight out of Sydney from their lockdown. There was news crews, etc. there, and to be honest, it's been a real challenge. I think that Melbourne is taking longer to return to pre-COVID levels than Sydney has. I was talking to a friend yesterday who runs, she looks after shopping centres, and their footfall hasn't picked up since pre-COVID levels either, which I took some comfort in, wondering why things have been challenging for us. You think that you have a successful recipe for a business in one state, therefore you hope to pick it up and replicate it in another state, and when the footfall isn't recovering as quick as you would like, it's very challenging times, to be very honest.
What sort of impact has that had on you personally, and sort of your perceptions of the industry and what you want to get out of it?
Look, I think it's never a good feeling to know that you're not sure whether the recipe was correct. And I think, perseverance is key. I'm confident that our offering and our position in the industry is correct. We just need to wait and they will come, I suppose, continue to be consistent and, communicating our message. And I think consistency is key, if I'm really honest, making sure that everybody that comes in has a great experience and it's matched up every time that they come. And that's kind of the base for all businesses. If you give if people have a great time, they'll return and they'll tell their friends. So that's kind of our key takeaway from Melbourne, and hopeful that they'll recover.
You mentioned that your role is really quite diverse. Tell us about your relationship with the head chefs of each venue and how you work together.
I have a really great relationship with all the head chefs. My role, I see my role is to not tell them, what they should be doing, but kind of work alongside them and mentor them to help get to the, personal, food, financial goals of our businesses. I have an exceptional relationship with all of the head chefs because they've all been around for a long time. And I think that's testament to how we treat our staff and how we value the leaders in our business, and also what we empower them to do. We have, retention is really important to us. And I think to all successful businesses, retention is key, because if you invest in your people, they invest in you back. All of our head chefs have been here for over 5 years, with the exception of Melbourne, obviously, because it's newer. And Indu Sydney had a bit of a change of the guard about 18 months ago because the head chef had a family and it was becoming a bit challenging for him to manage. But yeah, I see my role as a mentoring role for them to help get them to where they need to go and where the business needs to be. So I work alongside them, supporting their decisions and helping them navigate what the offer should be and what our guests want.
How do you run multiple venues that are so different? What are some of the key things, for those looking to expand to multiple venues themselves?
I think it's just people, having the right people, looking after your people and empowering them to have the knowledge. We are very transparent with every facet of our business. And I think that, any expansion, irrespective of what the offer is, if you look after your people, which obviously leads to retention, then and you have the right systems in place, and we're a systems heavy company, which has helped us survive the last few years and be able to open new businesses in other states. I think that people is the key. You need to look after your people, and then they will look after you.
Well, you're doing incredible things with the Sam Prince Hospitality Group. What do you love about what you do?
I love the diversity, to be honest. I love that we have, awesome teams that are super passionate about, our food and beverage offer in venues that are really, like sensory overload to come into. We have, a lot of repeat patronage, which I think is testament to the teams on the ground, and so many passionate individuals that work for us that want to be better all the time. I think that's the best bit, knowing that you have a team of people around you that have a common goal to make sure that, we are hospitable, which I think sometimes people forget in hospitality. Doing that, extra thing or going that extra mile for our guests, I think is key. And I'm really proud that we have a large group of people that are wanting to do that and do that on the reg. I think that's what I love most about this job, being surrounded by like-minded people and having a really supportive employer that empowers us to do so.
Well, Amanda, it's amazing what you do and an honour to catch up with you today. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
Great. I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.